Oh, it is so good to be with you. Be here today. And since I don't get one of the chocolate bags, I'll just use my... Actually, it's a water bottle. I just love these as water bottles because even after you use it for a little bit, it still tastes like chocolate. You know, it's chocolate-flavored water now, but yeah. Anyway, yeah, I'm glad to be here. Hope you're happy to be here too. At my age, I'm happy to be anywhere. That I'm able to just vertical walking around and talking, so I'm glad to be here. What we're going to be doing this morning, as you can see, we're going to talk a little bit about the science of archaeology. And I do put the word science in there. Well, look, it ends in ology, right? Archaeology, and we have biology, we have geology, we have zoology. We call those sciences. Well, archaeology is a science also. Not to be confused with paleontology. A lot of people get these two confused. Paleontology is looking at the fossil remains of the past, not historic things, man-made objects and stuff like this, tracing man's history back. Archaeology is looking at that stuff, looking at past civilizations, past cultures, and the remains of any human existence. That's what they do. So it is a science. Now, because it is a science, how many of you heard that science has disproved the Bible? You ever heard that? Yeah, hands are going up. Yes, we hear that. It's a phrase that's used frequently. It is totally inaccurate because there has never been a discovery, never once has there been a scientific archaeological discovery that disproves the Bible. You're not going to find one. Where on the contrary, what you do find, if you go to the field of archaeology, go to the Holy Land, go to Turkey, which did just get devastated, and many of the historical New Testament sites and stuff were damaged terribly, or you go to Rome or Greece or whatever. Wherever you go, Egypt, you will not find a provable archaeological discovery that disproves the Bible. There's not one. Not one. Where there are tens of thousands, probably much more than that now, because almost if you follow this in the news, you will find out that the Bible is being substantiated through archaeological discoveries constantly. As a matter of fact, just in the last 2 weeks, there's been some new discoveries. In the last month, there was a major discovery. They're in Jerusalem. They're digging around. There's 14 digs going on today, right now, in Jerusalem. 14 different digs. And that's not counting the other places all around in Israel. So what we're going to talk about this morning, I'm just going to give you a little popcorn thing of a couple of pieces to show you what I'm talking about, that the Bible is true. It is real. These people we read about are real. These events that we hear about are real. They did occur. And as you can see, I have quite a few things up here. This isn't everything I'm doing for this conference. There's some other things that's still out in my car and some things underneath our table over there. And do look at our table. We went through a lot of work putting that together, and it's got all sorts of these, I don't know what they're called, but you take your phone, you take a picture of it. I don't know what it is. Charlotte, who works for me, QR code? That's called a QR code. Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, that's all over there, and you can take a look at that. Now, what I'm going to do, though, I'm going to show you a couple of these, because some of this I'm going to show in the church service after the Sunday school time here. It'll go into that. But I want to show you a few things here, just to let you see evidence that the Bible is real. Now, first of all, I want to start off with this one. I don't know if you've ever been to Israel or been to Jerusalem. Many critics of today even doubt that the Jews ever lived in ancient time in Palestine. They doubt that. Muslims in particular, this is a big thing for them. They say no, because they're constantly fighting over the land. There are many atheists I know that do not believe that the Jews ever lived back in that time. Thus, if they didn't live there, there was no Temple of Solomon, Solomon's Temple. Well, Solomon's temple was destroyed. The Babylonians did a great job of destroying it. And then Zerubbabel comes 70 years later and builds a smaller one, which then Herod the Great comes and remodels it into the largest temple of the world at that time. But we do have evidence that there was a temple. And what we have here is a small little device here, a little piece. It's not very big. I know you can't see it. That's why we use PowerPoints to let you see what I'm holding up here. This is a replica. All you're going to see here, well, most of the things that I have on the table are replicas. There's a couple of authentic pieces. from my collection, but this is what we're looking at. You can see it much better up there. It's a small ivory, and if you're looking at the shape, it's a pomegranate. So it's a pomegranate. Why would this be important? Someone found this in Jerusalem. Why is this important? Well, if you go to the book of Kings and you start reading about Solomon building the temple and what he decorated, God gave him directions on how to build it and what to decorate it with. And one of the things, God loves pomegranates. We know this. And pomegranates are good fruit. You like pomegranates? How many of you know the pomegranates are very high in antioxidants and other things? They're very good for us. And God told us, hey, eat these things. Well, God must love pomegranates because he told Solomon to decorate the temple with pomegranates. And he had gold ones and stuff like this. This is a small little ivory pomegranate. So when he's building the temple, God instructed him to use pomegranates as a decoration, as we read in 1 Kings chapter 7, verse 42. And the 400 pomegranates for the 2 lattice works, 2 rows of pomegranates for each lattice, to cover 2 bowls of the capitals that were on pillars. So it's talking about pomegranates were used in decoration. Now, this is obviously not gold. This is ivory. So this was discovered back in 1979, and it was discovered, and it's just a small pomegranate. What it was probably, most likely, because we see this in other cultures too, that priests would sometimes carry, as they would walk around, carry a little staff, a small little staff about a cubit in length, about the arm's length like this, wooden staff. This was attached at the end. They would sometimes have the end a little decorative piece on it. And this one probably was on a staff that the priest, the high priest, would walk around with. And so we see this, just this little piece, the wood has disappeared over the years. But do you notice there's an inscription on this? Now, when you look at the inscription, this is what's interesting. Not that we just have an ivory pomegranate. That's sort of circumstantial evidence. But now we see something else in the inscription. Because this tells us, by the style of the writing, of approximately when it was made. Because writing styles change throughout time. You don't believe me, or if you didn't know that, just go back and look at the original copy of the Declaration of Independence. Or look at the Constitution. They didn't use S's, they used F's many times. So we can see different type of letters and things that were used, and the style of writing changes as time goes on. We've found enough writings that they can date things by writing. This has writing on it dating back to the early 700 BCs, around the time of Hezekiah, and the temple was standing there according to the Bible, but the inscription underneath here in English reads, belonging to the and you can see there's a section here where it's damaged, but it's obviously temple of the Lord. It would have been like Yehova, or we often in the United States call him Yahweh or Adonai, but holy to the priest. So there's a connection to this being with a priest. We see this in other type of cultures. So this appears to be evidence. As far as we know, this is the only provable evidence we have of Solomon's temple. They did such a good job destroying it over the years. And then, like I say, it was rebuilt twice, Zerubbabel and then Herod coming along later on. And someday, and very soon, there's a lot of talk in Jerusalem today about building a new one. So that's one piece. Let me show you, since we're talking about the temple, let me show you another piece showing that the Jews had a temple back during the time of Herod the Great. Now, as I just mentioned, Solomon's temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. That is actually talked about at the very end of the book of 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles. You can also read about that in Jeremiah's prophecies. But when they came back, and Ezra, the book of Ezra and Nehemiah both mentioned that the temple was being rebuilt. Zerubbabel rebuilt the temple. And when they came back, they rebuilt it. It was not to the grand, beautiful image that Solomon's temple was. It was very simplistic. It was much smaller in size. The Bible tells us the descriptions. Ezra gives us all that information. And it even says when they dedicated it, the older men who remembered Solomon's temple wept because this one was not as pretty or elaborate. Well, that temple was used for a long period of time until Herod the Great comes to power at the time of Christ. And Herod the Great modifies it. He was not Jewish, but he wants to please the Jews. And he took on the title, the King of Kings. And so he wanted to try to make the Jews love him. Of course, they never would. He was such a ruthless murderer. But he rebuilt their Jewish temple. Zerubbabel's temple. It took many, many decades to do this, but he made this thing immense. It was the largest temple in the world at that time. And it was magnificent. And remains of Herod's temple are still around today. For instance, this stone here. Now, this is a picture that Charlotte, who works for me, she's sitting back there. Wave, Charlotte. Charlotte works for us. She's our photographer and our she always calls herself my executive gopher. She runs all the electronics and stuff on our website and everything. That's her. And she took this picture here in the Jerusalem Museum. Now, it just looks like a big stone, but you can see, again, there's an inscription on it. Now, this stone was discovered by Dr. Benjamin Mazar back in 1968. And as he was excavating around what is today the Temple Mount, he came across this stone. It was broken. The part you can see underneath it, it's been broken sort of at an angle. That part was still there. It has no writing on it. This is the part that was so important because there's writing on it. And it's being identified as Herod's temple. This is sitting where the temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 A.D. General Titus, under his command, Jerusalem was destroyed again during the first Jewish revolt, and the temple caught on fire. He ordered the temple not to be burned. He had great respect for the temple. Actually, he was sort of in love with a Jewish princess, and he respected it. But the temple accidentally caught on fire, and he just, let it burn. There's no way to save this. And then, after all the gold inside melted down into the cracks of the stones and whatever, the Romans disassembled and toppled it. Just like Jesus says in Matthew 24, look at the temple, not one stone will be left upon another. And today, if you go there, the visual part, the foundation's still there, but most of the temple walls have been destroyed. But this has remained. Now, this is what it looked like when Dr. Mazar dug this out of the earth. This was buried under about 30 feet of soil, gravel, rock, and sand. As he was digging down, he came across this, taking it down. Because Jerusalem has been conquered 29 times in its history that we know of. And each time, they just build on top of it. In ancient times, when you conquered a city, you didn't take bulldozers, come in, and scrape it down to bedrock and rebuild the city. That's not the way they did it in ancient times. What you would do is you would take the rubble and fill it in and make it all flat again and bring in more rubble from out around the countryside and level it off and then build on top. Then when that civilization or that city was destroyed again, they did this again, and they bring another layer and set it there, and then they would take another one. So it's sort of like if you have a multi-layer cake and you make a slice in it or cut it in half, you can actually see the different layers. That's how Jerusalem is. And many of the ancient cities in Israel, and just in ancient times, are like that with different layers. The oldest layers, obviously, are the deepest ones. And as Dr. Mazar was digging down here, he came across this back to the Roman period, about the time just after Christ. During the time of the apostles, he finds this. And as they took this out, and what we see here is it's a trumpeting stone. And it was a place where they would stand and they would blow the trumpets. Now, his Jewish historian Josephus, in his book called The Wars of the Jews, he gives a description about Herod's temple. And on the corner of the temple, there was a spot overlooking the city. This is about several hundred feet high. And up there they would blow the trumpet. And he tells us in Book 4, Chapter 9, Section 12, let me just quote it to you here as you can read along with me, where one of the priests stood, of course, and gave a signal beforehand with a trumpet at the beginning of every seventh day, in the evening twilight, and also in the evening when the day was finished, as giving notice to the people when they were to leave off work and when they were to go to work again. So in other words, they didn't have Big Ben like they have in London sounding the time. What they had in ancient times, people would stand up and they'd blow a shofar. And there would be a person standing in a certain place in the temple. It was notched out at the top of the wall, the top corner, southwest corner. They notched out this wall, and they put an inscription here, the trumpeting area. This is where you blow the trumpets, is what it actually is saying. It's the trumpeting stone. And so the person would stand there, and he'd blow at different times of the day, signaling when the day's work begins, when the day's work ends. I mean, this goes back even for us to the Flintstones. Remember how the Flintstones start? You have Fred working on the Brontosaurus, and all of a sudden, the bird makes the thing, and the time of work is, oh, this is like that. And so this has been going on since ancient times. So that's what this was. Now, to show you where it was on a model of the temple, this is a reconstruction of Herod's temple. You can see how elaborate and large this is. And where I have a red arrow placed is in the southwest corner. Now, most of this is all gone today. The Temple Mount is flattened off. It's very flat. Today, the Dome of the Rock sits up there. A shrine to, third most holy shrine to Islam. And also there is a mosque where you see the brown, reddish-brown, long area by the red stone, or the red arrow there. And there's a mosque there today, too. But back at the time of Herod's temple, this is roughly pretty close to what it looks like, would have looked like. And where you see that arrow pointing, that's where this was. Now I'm going to take a picture, have a picture here showing the opposite angle here, looking to the north. And you can see again, with a red arrow pointing to where this trumpeting stone would have been. So it's standing, you can see this is very, very high up. If you look down at the bottom over here, you can see the double gate on the south side of the temple. And these were huge. These are several meters high from here to the arch, very, very tall. A person would only be about, maybe to the third rock, even if that, to show you the size and how high this was from the base down here up there. And this is where the person would stand. So there's other stones that you find dating back to Herod's temple. Part of the walls that were toppled down are still there to this day. Even the streets around there, they have dug down, and there's actually, you can walk along the street going on the west side of the temple. At one part, you go way underground. Even today, you walk way underground. It's sometimes called the Rabbi Tunnels, and it just parallels all the stones making up the foundation of the temple. It's really cool to do that. So there are evidence that Herod's temple, or what we call the Second Temple, was definitely there. No question about it. Let's go to something else that's really interesting. And to me, this is a fascinating thing. And I'm amazed at how many people don't know anything about this. And what it is, it's called the Ipuwer Papyrus. Now, I have a copy of it. This is not the original. The original's in a museum. But this is an exact copy of it. And this, you can see, it's just papyrus. But even at a distance, you might be able to see, you can see from here too, there's writing on it. Now, it's Egyptian. That's not hieroglyphics. It's hieratic writing, or hieratic script. Egyptians had that also. But you can see that there is writing on this. This was discovered, and it's a fascinating piece because it's called the Ipuwer Papyrus. It's also sometimes called, if you were to Google it, it's the Papyrus Leiden I-344. That's how they label the things. In any case, it's an ancient document. You can judge that just by looking at this copy here. It's an ancient document. But what is inscribed on this is so absolutely amazing. Because it's just not writing. It's actually a poem talking about disasters that have befallen Egypt. And it's written in the perspective of a person who witnessed it, who was there when it was taking place. And it records these disasters that happened to Egypt. There's 10 things that are mentioned here. And it's so interesting because this parallels what we see in the Bible, in the book of Exodus. Now, during the time of Moses, if you'll recall, we've all seen the movie 10 Commandments, Prince of Egypt, and all these fun things. But if you read the Exodus account, then you find out more. If you read it carefully, you find out how much those movies mess it all up. But, that's Hollywood, right? Hollywood likes to take historical things like Pocahontas. Look what they did with Pocahontas. How accurate was that? Oh, my gosh. But anyway, they take movies, even Prince of Egypt and all these, and they get this so messed up. For instance, Ramses II was not the pharaoh of the Exodus. Ramses lived during a period of when the book of Judges is taking place. In the middle of that book is when Ramses the Great was living. So it wasn't him. I will later on in this conference this weekend give you some information about who was then the pharaoh and when did it take place. We'll see that here. But scholars disagree about when this was actually written, the events themselves, but because it's describing plagues. But look, I'm going to show you different lines from this thing and show you how they describe what's going on in Egypt. But now we get a time frame. We are given a time frame in Scripture, too, of when the plagues and the Exodus took place. This is controversial with many scholars today. Many biblical scholars who trust the Word of God and look at evidence, and they can see tremendous evidence that the Exodus happened as the Bible records, at the time frame the Bible records. But we have gotten into this whole idea that Ramses the Great was the time when the Exodus took place. And as I told you, that is not correct, because the time frame doesn't fit. Where in the Bible does it tell us when the Exodus occurred? If you go to the book of 1 Kings, chapter 6, verse 1. Wait a minute. Exodus, 1 Kings, those books are hundreds of years apart. Right, about 480 years apart. Because it tells us here in Exodus 6:1 a very important thing about Solomon building his temple. And it reads, in the 480th year after the people of Israel came out of the land of Egypt. Stop right there. That's the Exodus. That's when they came out. So what's he talking about? 480 years after the Exodus, what happened? We read, continuing, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, he began to build the house of the Lord. What is that? Solomon's temple. We know when Solomon's temple was begun by other historic writings, both biblical and non-biblical. We get information about this. And we know that that was around 960 BC. So, 960, go back another 480 years, is going to take you into the 1400 BC period. Ramses lived around 1290 or so, but this is telling us the Exodus took place way before that in the 1400s, 1450, somewhere in that range is what this is describing. Actually, it's giving us the year right around 1450 BC, would have been when the Exodus occurred. So, we're way back in time. But anyway, they can't agree of when this papyrus was actually written. Some say, well, since it's describing the plagues of Egypt, it had to be written around 1290. Others say, no, by carbon dating and studying the style of the writing, no, it dates much earlier than that, or much later than that, going back further in time. And others look at this and they study and they look at the testing on all this, and they want to put it like in the middle frame, which would be around 1420 to 1440 BC, which is very close to the time the Bible says the Exodus took place. But what do we see here? What's on this? Because this is the important thing now. We see that it's very old, approximately around the time of the Exodus, according to the Bible. But what does it contain? That's what's so interesting. And it's, like I say, hieratic script. It's not in hieroglyphics. And it's called the Ipuwer papyrus because it actually has the guy's name on here. The person is named Ipuwer. We know nothing about him in history. He just writes this, and he puts his name on this papyrus. Now, what is fascinating, too, is this is a poem that he's putting together of stuff that he has seen in his country, these plagues that he has witnessed, and he's writing this down on this beautiful little papyrus that has survived antiquity here. And so in looking at this, what it says, it describes 10 disasters that befall Egypt. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through this English translation of what it's saying, and then I'm going to show you something in each one of these. What's being mentioned as a disaster, then we're going to take a look at what it says in the Bible, in the book of Exodus, and others pertaining to the plagues. This is going to just really frost your Wheaties, because this is so cool. Ready? On the papyrus, one of the first lines it reads, "There's blood everywhere. Lo, the river is blood." Now, even if you've never read Exodus, if you've seen the movie 10 Commandments of Prince of Egypt, you know that the Nile turns to blood, turns red. In Exodus chapter 7, verses 20 and 21, Aaron and Moses did as the Lord commanded in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants. He lifted up the staff, struck the water in the Nile. All the water in the Nile turned into blood, and the fish in the Nile died, and the Nile stank, so that the Egyptians could not drink the water from the Nile. And there was blood throughout all the land. What do we see in this papyrus? There's blood everywhere. Lo, the river is blood. Interesting coincidence, eh? Let's take a look at the second line. One thirsts for water. Again, in Exodus chapter 7, verse 24, we read, "And all the Egyptians dug along the Nile for water to drink, for they could not drink the water of the Nile." The Nile was the source of their drinking water. So if they can't drink it, they're thirsting. This fits the biblical account. Third line, it says, "Lo, the trees are felled, branches stripped." Okay, again, read your Bible carefully, verse by verse, and you'll see when you get to Exodus chapter 9, verse 24, we read this. One of the plagues was the hail. Hail struck down everything that was in the field, all in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And the hail struck down every plant and broke every tree of the field. Do you see? Ipure is describing this exact event. Fourth one, lo, grain is lacking on all sides. So this is what he's writing at this point. There is no grain. Go back to Exodus chapter 9, verse 31. The flax and the barley were struck down. That hailstorm destroyed everything. For the barley was in the ear and the flax was in the bud. In other words, this happened at the harvest season. Just before the harvest was taken in, this is when this happened. And now there's no grain. Egypt was known for its grain along the Nile. Even to this day, they still grow along the sides of the Nile. Egypt was the source of grain for much of the Middle East. In ancient times, they used to ship it out to places. Go back to the book of Genesis, even with Joseph, you can read about that. A fifth line, birds find neither fruits nor herbs. Again, let's go to the Bible. In Exodus 10:15, we read, the locusts came from all the land of Egypt and settled on the whole country of Egypt. Such a dense swarm of locusts has never been seen before, nor ever will again. They covered the face of the whole land, so that the land was darkened, and they ate what? All the plants in the land and all the fruit of the trees that the hail had left. Not a green thing remained, neither tree nor plant of the field through all the land of Egypt. Is that remarkable? Ipure is describing this exact thing. This is an Egyptian describing the disaster in his own country, and it's fitting perfectly with the biblical account. Let's go to the sixth line. Groaning is throughout the land, mingled with laments. Well, what happens at Passover? Exodus 12, verse 30, we read, and Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all the servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where someone was not dead. Again, he is talking about in this sixth section here, the groaning throughout the land and mingled with laments. That happened too, just as the Bible described. We go to the seventh one. Lo, many dead are buried in the river. The stream is the grave. The tomb became a stream, and he who puts his brother in the ground is everywhere. This is not a localized little area where people were killed. It's all over the land of Egypt. What does the Bible tell us? Again, back with the Passover, but now looking at the book of Numbers, we get a better description. Numbers 33:4, when Moses is describing what took place prior, he says the Egyptians were burying all their firstborn whom the Lord had struck down among them. Ipure is talking about burying people all over the place. Moses in the book of Numbers is saying the same thing. People were being buried because there were so many dead. And in that climate, you don't want bodies just laying around. There's no refrigeration back then. The eighth one, I just love this one. Ipure writes, all is ruin. All is ruin. Well, look what we have in Exodus chapter 10, verse 7. Then Pharaoh's servants said to him, this is after these plagues have been going on, we read, the people go to Pharaoh and say, how long shall this man, speaking of Moses, be a snare to us? Let the men go, that they may serve the Lord their God. Do you not understand that Egypt is ruined? It's so interesting. It's even using the same wording. Coincidence? This is a lot of coincidence. This is the eighth one in a row here. This is amazing. Let's go to the ninth one. Remember the plague of darkness? Oh, that could not have taken place, where it's just dark, all over the land of Egypt, but not in Goshen. Darkness in the middle of the day? No, no, no. Look at this. Exodus 10:22 and 23. Ipur says, the land is without light. Moses writes, so Moses stretched out his hand toward the heaven, and there was pitch darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. 3 days. And it's dark. This isn't a natural event. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days. But all the people of Israel had light where they lived. Here is Ipur telling us, during these disasters, we are in total darkness. The land is without light. There's no light anywhere. What's going on? And people are calling out. Because Pharaoh is a god, so they're complaining to Pharaoh and stuff like this. At least that's what they were saying, and Pharaoh always assumed to be God. But let's take you to the last one here. This is my favorite. I love this one. This is so cool. It says gold and lapis lazuli, silver and malachite, carnelian and bronze are fastened on the neck of female slaves. Ipur is writing about the wealth of Egypt. Egypt was known for having gold, silver, using carnelian, lazuli, bronze, etc., etc. Jewelry and stuff. We see it from some of the Pharaoh's tombs, how they pull it out. King Tut's tomb, Tutankhamun, when they found his tomb full of gems and stuff. As a matter of fact, if you followed the news, just last year, they found another Egyptian tomb, opened it up, it's full of all sorts of gold. It was a tomb that was never robbed, and they have found all sorts of jewels, and silver, gold, etc., etc. The Egyptians had all this. But here is Ipur saying, our stuff is gone. It's been taken. Who took it? He says, it's on the neck now of female slaves. What were the Hebrew people to the Egyptians when they were living there during the time of the Exodus? Slaves, exactly. They were slaves. Look what we read now in Exodus chapter 12. I love this one. 35 and 36. And the people of Israel had also done as Moses told them. For they had asked the Egyptians for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they let them have what they asked for. Thus, they plundered the Egyptians. They're slaves that plundered the Egyptians. Ipur writes, in this disaster about his country, our wealth basically is now found on the necks of slaves. Coincidence? This is 10 major coincidences that you're seeing here. This is an amazing account, in my opinion. This is an amazing account that these things actually did take place. And we see this. I mean, the plagues of Egypt, that's famous. Even people who are not Christians know about the plagues of Egypt and stuff. Well, there is evidence that these things did take place, written from an Egyptian perspective in the Ipur papyrus. How cool is that? Now, let's get to a couple of other things here, and then I'll open up for some questions here at the end, too. This is just a little popcorn thing of like what I'm going to do tonight. I'm going to give you right now. These are just little pieces of archaeological evidence that shows that certain events and certain biblical characters definitely did live. Because that's what a lot of people say. I mean, I don't know how many times I've had conversations with people where people have said David never existed. There's no evidence of David. Matter of fact, when I used to teach school, I'm a former teacher, back in the 1990s, I was living in Illinois, and I taught in a school outside of the area of Chicago, and we had a club that would meet on Saturday mornings. I handpicked about 25 students at my school. As many schools in the Chicagoland, we did this. We got together, science teachers, we got together, science and math teachers, to make a special club that would meet on Saturday mornings. Early in the morning, we'd go to a place in the Chicago area, big theater area, and we would hire scientists and people to come up and speak to the students. And when you would go, you'd come in there. We're talking, there's sometimes maybe 5,000 students from the Chicagoland that would show up for these things. And I had this, and we called it, you ready? Catchy idea? Saturday Scholars. Wow, is that original, huh? We took the smartest math kids and the smartest science kids, and we put them in this. if they wanted to. But they had to get up early because we had to be at school like at 6:30. I chartered a bus to take us up there, and we would be gone all morning. And then we would stop at like Burger King or White Castle or something like that on the way home. But what they did is we had, you would come in, they would give you a 3x5 card, and you would sit out in this big auditorium, different levels and stuff, and then the person would come out, and he'd talk for about anywhere from an hour to sometimes up to 2 hours doing a lecture on, these are different scientists in their field. We would fly in to do this. Each Saturday was one individual person would come up, and we had geneticists, we had astronomers, we had physicists, we had all sorts of people that came in and did presentations. With the 3x5 card you're given, if you had a question that came up, you could write it on the 3x5. Then came my favorite part of the thing. We took a 45-minute break. We went to a cafeteria at this school where this was at, and we ate Dunkin' Donuts and had chocolate and white milk. And now you know the real motivation behind this. I love Dunkin' Donuts. I would see Dunkin' Donuts years ago when they used to make, remember adults when they used to make the donuts in the stores? Remember there was a commercial on TV? Time to make the donuts. Remember that? Now they don't do that. They're made like in Texas or something, frozen solid and instant to these places. But back in those days, it was fresh donuts. And so I would brake. I would drive in my car, I see a Dunkin' Donuts, slam on the brakes, throw everybody forward. Hey, Dunkin' Donut, got to get one. The Bavarian custard, Bavarian with the powdered sugar, not the chocolate. I like the powdered sugar ones. I'd crawl on my knees in a blizzard to get a dozen of those. But anyway, so after we would have the break, you could put your card in a place where the person would go through during the break. He would pick out certain cards, come back out, and then he would answer the questions. Well, as we were sitting there, we had an archaeologist come, and that Saturday we sat on the front row right in front of him on this big stage. He's up here, we're sitting here, and I'm sitting right in the middle because my students really wanted to listen to this guy. He was an expert in the Philistines. His field was the Philistines. And during this time, he's talking about them. He had artifacts from the Philistines and stuff and talking about them. I took out my card, students on either side of me, because they saw me write, do we know the exact location of King David's tomb? And they saw that, and then during the break, I put it in the box. After the break, we came back out, was sitting there, and the guy comes out, and now it's time for questions, and he's got a handful of cards, and he says, the first one I want to address is this. Do we know the exact location of King David's tomb? And I'm sitting right here. My students are on either side of me, and they're saying, that's your card, that's your card, that's your card. And the guy, and like, count down, to make a scene right in front of the guy. And he says, who wrote this? And I knew this was not going to be good. He's not wanting me to raise my hand to commend me. He's going to do something bad here. And I'm like, I'm not raising my hands. Well, my students are sitting here making a come on. Like, put your hand up, put your hand. How could he avoid not seeing this? And I'm like, no, please don't do this. And finally, he's looking around. He can't help but notice. It's like waving bloody meat in front of a lion. He sees me sitting right here. He says, sir, you're the one who wrote this? I said, yeah. Would you stand up? I stood up. And he says, so you wrote this question about the location of King David's tomb? Yes. He says, sir, I hate to tell you, but King David never existed. There never was a King David. We think maybe that David was a clan of people called the Davidians or something. There's no evidence whatsoever that David ever existed, that there's no tomb, there's no David and Goliath thing. All of that is just a myth. So he's standing here just bashing my face right in front of me. And that's not unusual. Even today, you will find a few, not many today, there are still some scholars that say these biblical characters like David and others never existed, that what we have here is a book of myths. Well, I'm going to show you, start here. You want to see more? Come tonight. I'm going to show you a tremendous amount of these things tonight. And even the events, what I'm going to talk about tomorrow night, I'm going to take you to the event that is most attacked in the Bible, Jericho. I'm going to take you to Jericho. Yeah, field trip. Actually, we're not going to fly there and come back. It takes 11 hours just to get there. But I'm going to take you as close as I can using slides and stuff to Jericho and show you the story of Jericho and why it's so controversial. It's taught in all universities, most universities, it's a mythical story. These are not myths. there are evidence. Even down to little people you hardly even recognize or never, when you read your Bible, you sort of pass over. For instance, this one here. A guy by the name of Sergius Paulus. Who in the world is Sergius Paulus? Well, if you read in Acts chapter 13, when Paul and Barnabas, when they go to the island of Cyprus, Luke, who is writing this book, Acts 13, verse 7, he specifically says, he was with the proconsul Sergius Paulus, a man of intelligence who summoned Barnabas and Saul at that time, and sought to hear the word of God. So he's calling them. But you notice that this guy is mentioned as a person, gives us his name, Sergius Paulus. It says that he's a proconsul. In other words, he's a government official of high rank. Well, they found this stone. Actually, his name has popped up now 3 times in archaeology. One in Rome, one in Cyprus, and this stone here, which was found in Antioch. And this stone here, you can see it's written in Latin, but it has his name on here. Sergius, you can see a couple of letters are missing here, but Sergius is on the bottom line, and right smack dab in the middle is Paulus. This guy really did live. And this is probably from a temple complex where he was making a dedication, but it talks about him, and it goes on in some of the other ones, it talks about him being a proconsul. Exactly what Scripture says. This guy really did live. Like I say, there's 3 stones that they have found his name inscribed on it, and in all 3 he is being referenced as a high government official. This guy's real. Now, if this is real, and he's such a minor character, most of you, if you're totally honest with me, probably would say, I'd never heard of him before, because we just read over passages like this without thinking about him. This is so important because he's such a minor character that even the minor characters the Bible got right. You see how important that is? Here's another one. This is called the Black Obelisk, and it's about 6.5 feet high. It's basalt rock. It's been polished very nicely, and it's been carved on. But it actually mentions and has a portrait of King Shalmaneser III. Now, he is mentioned in the Bible, and this was discovered in a place called Nimrod back in 1846. Austin Layer was the person who found this thing buried in the ground, took it out. It's still complete. The thing is totally intact and not been broken up throughout time. And it's 4-sided, and you can see there's inscription, there's pictures at the top, sort of like a kind of book that a lot of people would like. It's got a lot of pictures on it, and then at the bottom it's got a description. So if you're a visual learner, you got the pictures at the top. That's how the Assyrians did things, I guess. And at the bottom, for those who are literal learners. So you got the same thing. But you can see inscriptions here. And in this, it's talking about, on this obelisk, it's actually speaking about the kingdom of Israel, not Judah. This is Israel, the northern kingdom of the Old Testament. How that kingdom came in submission to the kingdom of Assyria, to King Shalmaneser III, and asked for help and paid tribute to them. But it has more on it. I'm going to blow up the picture here a little bit of what you see on this thing. You can see that there are 2 people standing on the right, 3 people on the left, and then there's a person bowing and kissing the ground, or like kissing where the feet would be of the guy who's standing in front of him. The person who's standing in front of him is identified by the writing that is Shalmaneser III. The person who is bowing is called King Jehu. He's the king of Israel. And it says on here, he's paying tribute, and it even says who he is the son of Omri. This is right out of the Bible, guys. Exactly right out of the Bible. And it's an event going back to around 841 BC. The Bible tells us what's happening here, and we see it on this obelisk. That the tribute, and this is what in italics means it's quoted directly from it, that King Jehu was offering a tribute to this king, this Assyrian, of silver, gold, a golden bowl, a golden vase with pointed bottom, golden tumblers, golden buckets, a tin, a staff for the king, and perukuti, fruit. Who knows what these are? We don't know, but there was some type of fruit. And if you look carefully at the image, you will see the people who are standing on either side of Jehu and Shalmaneser, who's the two center people. They're carrying these gifts. Now, we do know from the Bible that King Jehu, he's the one who slaughtered the descendants and stuff of Ahab and cleaned out the thing. God told him to do it. He goes over and he sort of gets a little bloodthirsty, and he kills so many people by doing this. Goes over what God had intended, but he clears out the family of Ahab as God predicted it would happen. But then the country of Syria starts, this is in the Bible, starts invading Israel. So what he did is mentioned many times in Scripture. They would pay off another kingdom to come and attack them to give them relief. So Jehu goes to the Assyrians, present-day Iraq, and gives them all this tribute. I'll give you all this money if you will attack Syria and get them off my back. That's what's going on. But you see, King Jehu is actually bowing in submission and actually worship. He wasn't a real true follower of God very much. And he's bowing in worship to this King Shalmaneser III. That's there. His son was Sargon II, who conquers the upper kingdom later on. He's mentioned in the book of Isaiah, chapter 20, verse 1. We come across Sargon II being mentioned in the Bible. This guy actually lived. This is a relief from part of a palace in what was Nineveh, and it actually has his name. Nineveh was the capital of the Assyrians. And it actually has his image on there, talks about his accomplishments and stuff of how he conquered the northern tribes. He's the one who came to Israel, conquered the 10 northern tribes, and then dispersed them, sent them all out. And to this day, we have the lost 10 tribes of Israel. But they're coming back, if you haven't noticed. That's what's in the news right now. Jews and stuff are coming back to the land of Israel. And they're opening up housing because Israel's starting to overflow with people now, and they're having to build more houses, and so they're going into the West Bank because there's no place to put them. Besides, to the Jews, this is the land that God gave us. It's our land. So who is man to tell us where we can have our land and stuff? So that's what's going on there right now. But the 10 tribes, and by the way, just to let you know something else that's fascinating, having to do with the 10 lost tribes, this is fascinating. Back in the latter 1980s, early 1990s, we started learning about DNA and how you can trace DNA. We use it in crime detection, forensics, and stuff. Well, some people in the latter 1990s, early 2000s got an idea we can trace people's ancestry. Now, we all know about this. How many of you have done like an Ancestry.com thing? Has anybody in here traced your ancestry? Okay, there's a few people who have done that. Okay. They came up with this idea, and there were some Jews that came up with the idea, if we do this, we should be able to find out where the 10 lost tribes are. Who are the people who are from those 10 tribes? And they started doing this. And they published a book. I can't remember the title offhand, but the first book came out on this was around 2010, that they were doing this thing. And it was a small little paper, or a small little book, but it was mentioning how they are using DNA to try to find all the Israelites that were scattered by the Assyrians. It's actually going on. And it's still happening, and now we have Ancestry.com and a bunch of others, about another dozen of these companies doing this, and they're compiling the work, and the Jews are in the process of finding the 10 lost tribes, which is so important, because if you study eschatology, end-time prophecy, God calls them back. They're 10 lost tribes to us. We've lost them in history. God knows where they are. And it's so interesting that this DNA technology is being used by people now to help identify them. Without realizing it, many of them, they're fulfilling prophecy for the end times. This is so cool. So, anyway, he's the guy who scattered them. He also has this written. This is, I have not this one here, but I have the way the Assyrians wrote things and stuff. They would put them on clay, and then they would bake the clay. And this is you're seeing a photograph. Charlotte took this photo in Jerusalem at the Jerusalem Museum. But they would write, this is a library book. Could you imagine carrying a bunch of these? Or like this? And what you would do is you would set this down, because it's written in lines. You would set this down like on soft clay or semi-hard plaster, and you would roll it and then you'd be able to read it. So the book could be read many times like that. So that's how these things were done. Well, this is a cylinder from Sargon II, and on this it actually states in the Assyrian language, and I'm quoting this right off this, it says, I, this is Sargon II, brought into Samaria, that's the northern tribes, people from countries conquered by my hands. I appointed my eunuch as governor over them, and I counted them as Assyrians. The Bible tells us that when the Assyrians conquered the northern 10 kingdoms, they scattered most of them, but not all of them. And instead, the king of Assyria brought foreigners in and had them live there and intermarry with the people. That was to help stop any rebellions. It was a political move. This is describing exactly what the Bible says actually took place. And then we get to King Sennacherib, one of my favorites. Oh my gosh, this is so cool. This is a large panel that you're looking at. It's a huge, massive panel. And Charlotte did this and did a little magic to put all the pictures together to let you see this whole thing. This is King Sennacherib. He was the greatest king of the Assyrians. He's the one who conquered the largest land area of the Assyrian Empire. And this is one of his describing a battle taking place where he is conquering his greatest gem. It was the city of Lachish. Lachish is about 20 miles or so west of Jerusalem. And it was the most fortified and the heaviliest protected city, the most powerful city in all of Judah. And Sennacherib, this event, by the way, is mentioned in the Bible. And Sennacherib actually comes here and conquers this city. And what the Assyrians did, the way that they conquered cities is, up until that time, you basically surrounded a city and starved them into submission. The Assyrians invented the battering ram. Up until then, people used crowbars. There are historic accounts of Egyptians and other kingdoms going up, attacking a city, and sending their soldiers in with large crowbars to try to pull the walls apart. Of course, they're getting shot by arrows all the time. It wasn't the most wise thing to do. But no one had the brains yet to invent an armored battering ram. The Assyrians did. Now, to do this, you have to have ramps. Cities are built up on these tells, big hills. So to push that up there, that requires a lot of work. You've got to have a ramp to do that. There is a ramp that is shown here. As you can see, this is an angle. That's intentional. It's showing that these things are going up. That's a battering ram right there. There's another one right here. That they were using this. And Sennacherib actually appears on this. And it says in 2 Chronicles 32:9, after this, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, who was besieging Lachish. So it says, he conquered Lachish. This is a panel from the palace in Nineveh that was removed, luckily, before ISIS got there and destroyed most of the artifacts and stuff. This is removed, and it's here in this museum, and we can see a picture of it. This is Sennacherib sitting way over here on the right, sitting on the throne, watching the battle take place. This is from Google Earth, showing the city of Lachish, and Lachish, you can see this is you can't really tell from here, but this is a tall tell. A tell is just a big hill where they built cities, and you can see some of the ruins and stuff up here. I've been here a number of times, walked all around this place. But if you look carefully, it's hard to see from this, but I was trying to get it from my picture. It's a lot clearer on my computer than what you're seeing. But right here, there are some parallel lines. Actually, there's 5 parallel lines going from that walkway, this street, down to the bottom. I wish you could see it from this screen or this one, because you can really see it clearly. But the way that they conquered, they had to build ramps. Here's a picture of one of the ramps I took. You can see this is just rough gravel. The top of the tell is up here where the walls were. They built these ramps. And according to that plaque, he built 5 siege ramps. There are 5 siege ramps going up to that city still today. And if you walk around there, turn over rocks, they find arrowheads all the time, bronze arrowheads all over the area. It was a terrible slaughter of what Sennacherib did, but it describes exactly what took place in the Bible. We are about out of time, but I just wanted to show you some of this stuff. I'll answer. I think I got time. Do I have time to answer a couple of questions? I do? All right. But I know there's so much more we could go into, which we will. We will. If you come back tonight, I'm going to hit more on biblical characters and events and show you a lot of stuff. And I hope you come back on Monday night, the Jericho thing. It's one of my favorite places to talk about in the show. But if you have any questions. Ah! I will show you tonight. It is located. Matter of fact, we made a video of it. Is that on our website already, or is that coming yet? It is on our website. All right, well, I hope you'll stick around, because what we're going to talk about next is, in the service, I'm going to be doing a thing about, well, how accurate is this? How accurate is our Bible? So that's what we'll talk about. I want to thank you so much for going through this, and if I put you to sleep, hopefully you're awake for the next one. So take care. God bless. Talk to you later, eh?